Well, g'day and welcome. It's great to have your company. Well, it's morning in America following the election of Donald Trump and voters' emphatic repudiation of the woke political agenda that's at the heart of the West's economic and social decline. Can America seize the moment and become great again? Will Australian politicians, particularly in the coalition, have the courage to now push back on net zero and the radical trans agenda and so many other crazy ideas of the left which are doing so much harm? Speaking of net zero, Gerard Holland from the Page Research Centre will join me to explain why nuclear energy is by far cheaper than so-called renewables. In a speech at last month's ARC conference in Sydney, he made Chris Bowen look an even bigger fool. You won't want to miss my chat with Gerard coming up in just a moment. As usual, Kirralie Smith from Binary joins me and we'll look at how Kamala Harris and Tim Walz failed to sell the idea that men could be women. It was a real voter turn-off. Is this the end of the line for the radical LGBTIQA+ political movement? Also, today is Remembrance Day, when at the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns fell silent on the Western Front after 4 years of bloody war. Lest we forget. Well, America and the West have been given a reprieve from so-called progressive politics which have dominated in recent years. With their power threatened, elites in the media, academia, politics and the corporate world reacted with hysteria to the possibility of Donald Trump's return to the White House. Ridiculous Hitler slurs and scares about the end of democracy, coupled with Kamala Harris's most prominent policy pitch, wait for it, abortion to birth, none of that worked. She was still banging on about abortion in her concession speech, despite its failure to attract voters. She even lost white women. They all voted for Trump, despite Trump having a women's problem, supposedly. Trump, of course, is not perfect and he makes mistakes. We all do. The level of vitriol, though, seen through politically weaponised judiciary, radically biased media and 2 assassination attempts has been absolutely unhinged. Let's hope it stops now, now that he's been re-elected and that he has given the chance to enact the policy agenda that Americans overwhelmingly voted for. Sacred cows of the globalist progressive left, including those held dear by elites in Australia's Labor, Greens and Liberal parties, have been repudiated. Telling children their gender is fluid will be booted from schools and the economy will be unshackled from cost of living destroying net zero initiatives following Donald Trump's emphatic return to the presidency. The so-called progressive political project that has plunged the West, including Australia, into decline has suffered a major setback. Trump's drill baby drill policy will unleash America's abundant oil and gas reserves, making energy and therefore the cost of everything cheaper. Trump will withdraw from the Paris net zero agreement. That will bring down the cost of electricity. Australia should do the same, but sadly both Liberal and Labor are digging in, preferring to stay in the globalist net zero fantasy club. As recently as yesterday, Peter Dutton was committed to that. Families struggling to make ends will begin to prosper again if energy is made affordable again. We'll see that in America. Hopefully it'll overflow to Australia. Trump's proposed cuts to regulations and corporate tax will stimulate economic growth. This is all just common sense. The southern border will be secured following the illegal entry of around 15 million unvetted people. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were punished for not attending to the basics. This should be a warning to Australia's political elites. Harris and Biden pursued progressive ideology instead, which resulted in high inflation, high debt, illegal immigration, men and women's sports, and abortion to birth. Radical political correctness, which stifles freedom of speech and religion, will be banned under Trump. And with J.D. Vance warning that European nations with defence ties to the US, well, those ties could be threatened if they don't support freedom of speech. There's a warning there for the Albanese government, which wants to censor Elon Musk and censor us online. After having the proverbial kitchen sink thrown at him by a politically weaponised Justice Department and having been repeatedly labelled fascist and his supporters garbage, Trump survived those 2 assassination attempts to reclaim the presidency after a loss that was tainted by all sorts of election fraud and goings-on in 2020. No one seriously believes that Biden got 81 million votes in 2020, but that's another story. It's the most extraordinary political comeback since the much maligned Winston Churchill, who suffered in the political wilderness during the 1930s before successfully leading Great Britain through its darkest hour. Cometh the man, cometh the hour. As well as toxic gender fluid ideology, Trump has vowed to get critical race theory the hell out of our schools. Kids will be taught to be proud of America again. Imagine if we could do this in Australia instead of the annual Australia Day round of self-loathing and our kids being taught that our country is a tainted colonial oppressor. After the Democrats and the deep state tried everything to destabilise Trump's first presidency with a fake Russia investigation and impeachments, a battle-hardened Trump will be more productive this time. Former Democrat Elon Musk's purchase of the social media platform Twitter, which he renamed X, kept free speech alive. We can't underestimate the role that Musk played in stopping the tech giants from putting their thumbs on the scale of information. That is a huge contribution to this electoral cycle. Musk's contribution and that of Robert F. Kennedy, his endorsement, again, the former Democrat member of the Democrat royal family, the Kennedys, that endorsement should also not be underestimated as well. Australian politics needs these sort of big rocks to be thrown into the pond as well. Now, unlike the 2020 election, the tech giants and the mainstream media were unable to control the information flow by suppressing critical stories like the Hunter Biden laptop story, which undoubtedly influenced the outcome. It was a much freer and fair election this time around. Trump is certainly a flawed vessel, and his narcissism and his American brashness, well, that can grate. But he has courage in spades, staring down vitriolic opposition from the political and media elites, and not to mention those 2 assassination attempts, well, a third if you count the Iranians and their plot to try and kill him as well, which was uncovered by the FBI. Now remember, Trump was initially opposed vigorously by his own Republican Party. They didn't want him the first time round, and they certainly didn't want him the second time round. The same forces Trump overcame in the Republican Party are the ones that still control Australia's coalition parties. Now, the question for Australia is this: is there anyone willing to push back on the status quo in the way that Trump has? A few coalition backbenchers, like the courageous Queensland Senator Matt Canavan, have, but they seem to be voices in the wilderness. It doesn't seem to move Peter Dutton, doesn't seem to move the party room. Australia's political establishment is entrenched, and the coalition seems to be unwilling to be bold, except, and to their credit, on nuclear energy, which is a promising sign, but of course it's nowhere near enough. As I said, the Liberal Party have confirmed over the weekend that they want to remain in the Paris Accord, despite Trump saying he's going to pull America out of it. It's pointless for us to stay there. If America's not there, of course, China and India take no notice of it and they're emitting it. The whole thing is a farce. The targets cannot be met. And all it is doing is hurting the poor. Australia's political leaders actively support or acquiesce through their silence to social policies like gender fluid ideologies, claim on children, and the left's anti-free speech agenda that has enforced this through a chilling regime of anti-discrimination and anti-vilification laws. Both sides of politics are on board, as I say, with the net zero, except for the coalition's nuclear agenda, and that is a green shoot, of course. The coalition's policy still allows windmills and solar farms to be rolled out unnecessarily, blighting the landscape and adding to household power bills. The US has been spared another 4 disastrous years of Democrat policies carrying the agenda of these progressive elites. This will provide cover for Australian politicians who are willing to rush the guards of progressive orthodoxy which exist in the Labor, Liberal and Greens political establishment. The next 4 years provide an opportunity for Australian political leaders to drain the billabong. Only a lack of courage stands in the way.